to the Fantasy Footballers Podcast with your hosts, Andy Holloway, Jason Moore, and Mike Wright.
What is going on, everybody? It is time to talk some fantasy football. This is the Fantasy Footballers Podcast. Friday, September 4th, and we're back again. This is Andy Holloway, joined by Jason Moore.
It's always time to talk fantasy football, Andy.
And Mike, the Fantasy Hitman Wright.
Let's get this going.
Let's do it. We got a good show for you today. We're talking news and notes. We had a bunch of Week 4 games last night. Not a lot of news from those games themselves.
Did you guys watch all those games? I hope.
Every snap of every game.
Yes. Very exciting because watching Chris Johnson run the football and try to run the football was kind of the pinnacle of...
He had some bursts.
He looked okay.
Yeah.
He looked okay. He'll make the team now. We're talking to Matt Harmon from NFL.com. Reception Perception. Good stuff today.
Yes.
You have to hear this.
Very
It's great.
sharp man.
Very sharp. Well-dressed, right?
I was going to say, like ZZ Top, sharp-dressed man, but I don't know how
Sharp
he
mind.
I don't know how he was dressed over the telephone.
No, that was tough. All right, and then we're talking kind of we're just going to open up 5 big questions for this season, fantasy implications. Talk about some I don't know if we're going to get to 5, actually. So big questions, things that are important, things that are going on.
Maybe 5.
We'll see. Maybe 5 big questions. So quick question for the day, guys. How do you approach post-draft trading, specifically this little period of time in between the draft and Week 1? Any thoughts?
I love post-draft trading because you can...
But why didn't you just draft him?
Well, because a lot of times what happens is after the draft, you see the needs of your team, and you see some teams that made mistakes. And I really like targeting teams that made mistakes.
That's a good point.
In trades, it's saying, oh, they had no reason to draft, say, that second quarterback, and I can get them really cheap. Or they are desperate for a wide receiver. I've got an extra one, and you can kind of take advantage of people.
I also like if I have ended up with someone else's handcuff, I don't purposely seek them out. But if I have ended up with somebody's handcuff and it looks like their roster that they really should be backing up their guy, like a Nile Davis type for a Jamal Charles owner, I might see if I can swindle a little 2-for-1 hot action before the season even starts.
Yes, I have Sam Bradford on one of my rosters, and when the news broke on Brady, I picked up Brady right away, and then I had a bunch of trade offers for Brady. So I guess part of it is also news breaking and things changing and people wanting to acquire guys. Somebody came after him that had Gronk, and so he wanted that combination. So, yeah, I like your point, Jay, taking advantage of weaknesses that people discover after the draft is over. How can you find the show? You can find us on the Fantasy Sports Network. You can, which is awesome. It's awesome to be on there. You can find us on YouTube. All the episodes are on YouTube. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, on Android devices. We're everywhere that you want fantasy football, that you can listen to fantasy football. So thefantasyfootballers.com, you can go on there, check out articles, submit questions to the show. One thing we like to do from time to time is read a review that we get in iTunes from our guests. We're going to go ahead and do one of those today.
Reviewosaurus Rex.
This one comes in from Dorf58. Thanks, Dorf. He or she says, I've been listening to these mostly bearded wonders since summer. It's a show with so much information amid snarky comments and Oreos that I can't wait for the rest of the season. I owned my draft because of the show. Sorry I can't tell my other fantasy owners about the show, but we can't all be winners. That's true, Dorf.
Truth.
That's true, Dorf. Very good review. Thank you very much, and brings up some good points, specifically listening through the season so that we can help you every step of the way. We're going to have all the waiver wire pickups every single week, the guys you need to be paying attention to. We're going to have start, sit advice. We're going to answer listener questions throughout the entire season. So make sure you tune in here. We really appreciate the reviews. They help the show a lot, and so we like to give a shout-out to our Foot Clan every once in a while when we pick out a review. So that's what we did there. And anything else going on, guys?
Let's get to the news.
News and notes from around the league.
Brady resuspended.
No, he's not. I was going to say the news yesterday was Brady's suspension's over. I think right now a lot of cuts are taking place, so if either of you guys see any cuts that are of significance while we're on the show here, we can hit the breaking news button. But basically, Brady is back on the field. The NFL has said they're going to appeal the suspension, but they're not going to seek an injunction to take him off the field ahead of time. So he will start at the beginning of the season. Browns coach Mike Pettin said Isaiah Crowell has the edge right now over Terrence West. We know Duke Johnson is recovering. So I think Crowell actually represents some pretty good early season value right now.
Agreed.
So he's been a forgotten man to some degree. One thing that was interesting about the games last night is two players that played a lot. And their names were Monte Ball, who was pathetic. 1 point something a carry. I think he's gone. I think there's no chance he makes the roster, which is kind of, I guess, humorous considering the beginning of this offseason. It was just him talking about how he's taking the starting job back.
Yeah.
Except for you can't overcome mediocre skill. So the other guy is, what do you think about Dwayne Bowe being on the field for 3 quarters on a 4th preseason game after signing a $9.3 million guaranteed contract? There's rumors that he's on the roster bubble.
Well, the Pettin came out and said that's not true, which it's still that could be just coach speak. But I think it speaks more to a player who has been injured and has gotten no reps and no snaps of any kind of value for during training camp or preseason. So they just wanted to get him a little bit acclimated to game speed, taking some hits.
A couple more guys that played last night, LeGarrette Blount and Devontae Parker. LeGarrette Blount had another poor game. He's obviously missing the beginning of the season, but he hasn't looked very good at all. That running back situation is always in flux, it seems like.
Yeah, so I've been asked, who's a later round, last round guy that I'm looking at. I'm looking at Jonas Gray, because Jonas Gray, you want to swing for the fences with your last pick because they're so easily cuttable. They represent no cost for you. Go complete upside. Jonas Gray's done it before.
You know what's interesting, though? I'm just going to devil's advocate Jonas Gray. Would you consider – I might consider Bolden above Gray.
Brandon Bolden?
Yeah, because if he's going to be the third down guy, and he's taken between the tackle carries too, is there a chance that he ends up with a kind of majority role that more than we think?
No, I don't think so.
Because we've seen him for games at a time.
I think with 2 big backs in front of him, in Jonas Gray and LeGarrette Blount, I couldn't see him taking the workhorse type role. And honestly,
he's not small though.
I love the idea of Jonas Gray, but I feel like even if Jonas Gray gets off to a hot start, you just don't know game to game. All of a sudden, they're gonna take a different guy and give him a lion's share. You just can't rely on that running back.
Right, but we're talking about your very last pick, and let's say he goes off week 1. You have a trade chip sitting on your bench that maybe you don't buy into. He'll be the weekly guy, which it still happens. I mean, you look at Stephen Ridley a couple years ago. He was fantastic for fantasy purposes. Jonas Gray had a stretch where he was useful, and then he overslept.
So who are some other guys in that category? Because Marcus Wheaton's another guy that could have a good first few games that you can trade away. So there are certain players that are going to get opportunities early in the season.
Yeah, Steve Smith is a big one for
just
me.
with Perryman coming back and his age.
Yeah, because
he's a front season.
The Ravens really need Steve Smith to perform if they want to have a decent looking offense. And to me, it's hard to. You don't want to just take last year's narratives and plop them right into this year. But it seems like a low hanging fruit that they're going to have to overuse Steve Smith to start the year because they don't have the number 1 wide receiver rookie, and he could bust off some big games, and then I would look to move him.
Anybody else come to mind as early season starts?
Rashad Jennings.
Okay, that's a good one.
I think anywhere where there's a huge question mark
Crowell.
because of exactly all those situations when it appears like, oh, we finally know who the guy is at the very beginning of the year. It's going to be Crowell. He got the ball all game, or Jennings, or if that happens, to me, I am more of the mindset that I can't see any of those situations lasting through the season. So I'm going to take advantage of that in a trade. Now, maybe I'm being a fool and I'm the one being taken advantage of because, oh man, Crowell's a 20-touch guy all year long. I just don't see basically with the coaching situations and the running back situations behind those players in those places, New York and Cleveland, places like that, I think you're better off to trade him. That would be my.
Let's say you can get an upgrade though right away. You can do Crowell and some scrub on your bench, do a 2-for-1, get an upgrade at a starting position. It's the bird in hand situation. I'll take it. I'll take the guy who's useful to me right now instead of this maybe on my bench.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And one of the things that can be really frustrating is you might take a guy as a flyer in the draft and love him. But you know how hard it is to keep that roster spot for him 2-3 weeks into the season when he hasn't performed and he hasn't done anything? So one other bit of news that I didn't have written down here, but Jay Ajayi has a broken rib.
Yeah.
He actually put up 5.6 a carry in the preseason and looked okay, but the broken rib could put him on IR, and he's going to miss time regardless. So the clear-cut handcuff for Lamar Miller,
Damian Williams.
Yeah, all right. So I agree with that. So before we hit the big questions here, I want to talk to you about Stamps.com. Today you can get basically anything on demand. That's what this podcast is all about. You might be listening to it at night when you're working out. You might be listening to it on your drive to work. Well, just like our podcast, Stamps.com is convenient for you. So why are you still going to the post office and dealing with their limited hours when you can go to Stamps.com and get postage on demand? Anything that you can do at the post office, you can do from your desk at Stamps.com. That means buying and printing official U.S. postage for any letter or package using your own computer or printer. And unlike the post office, Stamps.com doesn't close. So you get postage whenever you need it, 24/7. Right now, you can use our promo code FOOTBALLERS for a special offer, a 4-week trial, and a $110 bonus offer, including a digital scale and up to $55 of free postage. So do not wait. Go to Stamps.com before you do anything else. Click on the microphone at the top of the homepage and enter the promo code FOOTBALLERS. That's Stamps.com. Enter FOOTBALLERS. Let's go ahead and get to our questions.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
All right. I like that drop.
Thank you.
I like that drop. Good job, Mike. All right, so we're just going to kind of this is going to be free-flowing. We're going to talk about some big-time questions that we see jumping out at us for this season. It seemed like a really good topic and segment to discuss right before we get to next week. And next week, just so you know, is going to be all of your start-sit for week 1. It's going to be all of the guys you need to be paying attention to and getting ready for the season. I'm super excited about week 1. I know these guys, you guys are kind of bored.
I am jonesing for week 1, but this is going to be a fun time too, because this is the time where we just talk about these big questions, like in conjecture, a little bit more banter today, because we don't know the answer.
These
to
are
questions.
These are landscape questions. What is the fantasy landscape? What is going on? So the big kind of first question I want to just discuss is it happens every year. Which top picks do we think are going to bust? Which guys have the potential to bust? And so talk about players and them not performing.
So I'll just start this conversation out with the bust data. I've done some research over the past 3 years, and it comes up with some really interesting things for the top 12 drafted running backs and top 12 drafted wide receivers. Last year, so 2014, the top 12 ADP running backs drafted, there was 3 busts. Adrian Peterson, because he was suspended. There's no possible way you could have seen that. Monte Ball, you could have possibly seen it. And Doug Martin. So of the 3 guys of the top 12 were massive busts. And but then you let's look at the top 15. Who finished in the top 15? 8 of the top 12 guys finishers were drafted as the first 12 running backs.
8 of the top 12?
Yes.
Wow.
At the running back position.
Yeah, so that's a very high probability that you're getting a top 12 guy by staying with the running backs, because everyone freaks out.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know?
Half of the first running... Oh, wait, where's that voice? But Mike, half of the first running backs bust.
Yes. Yeah, that is true. And then we move over to the wide receivers, because that's the argument, right? And now, granted, we're only looking at 1 year. We can go back even further. But last year, 3 busts of the top 12. Brandon Marshall, Keenan Allen, Cordarrelle Patterson. Now, what Marshall's
Cordarrelle Patterson was going in the top 12 last
he
year.
was top 12 wide receivers.
Wow.
Marshall was an injury. Allen was, I think he was beat up, and just inconsistent play. And Patterson was just a massive bust. Let's look at the top 15 finishers of the year. 8 of the top 12 were from the top 12 ADP guys. So not almost, identical bust rate last year for wide receiver and running back.
So here's what we know then. We know that players will bust. Some percentage of them will bust. So who are the guys then this season that you think have a potential to do that? Who are in that range?
Okay.
Because a couple guys jump out to me as I'm a little bit concerned.
I'm going to go with a guy that a lot of people really love. And obviously, if you look last year, the top 12 guys, people really loved them. That's why they go top 12. But if you look at 2 of the 3 busts, Keenan Allen and Cordarrelle Patterson, what do they have in common? Oh, they're going to take a huge
Sophomore.
They're going to take that huge sophomore leap. But the problem is people forget that there's also a very common sophomore slump. And I think that the big difference between, hey, who's the sophomore wide receiver that's going to take a step forward or step backwards is situation, right? You look at Jordan Matthews, his situation got better. Jeremy Maclin left. But with Keenan Allen and Cordarrelle Patterson, their situations were basically just the same. And there was an assumption of progression. So to me, Mike Evans is the guy. I don't see anything really that makes his world any better. We're just expecting he was awesome as a rookie. He's going to be awesomer as a sophomore. And he could be, he's going to be awesomer as it's a word now.
It is now.
But that's the name that I would throw out from wide receivers, just because there's really no reason other than he's going to get better in his sophomore year.
And one component of bust has to be the injury factor as well, because we talked about the suspension that was an unknown with Adrian Peterson. If this injury had happened a little bit later for Arian, that would have been an already kind of bust type situation where you just don't see it coming, but there's a risk involved to those pieces. One guy I want to talk about that fits into that mold, I love him on the field, is C.J. Anderson. But his situation isn't solidified enough. He's not a big enough guy in terms of production over time to where if an injury happens, even a small one, if he pulls a hamstring and misses a game and a half, if he gives the opportunity to Ronnie Hillman for a little while, you could see a very shared backfield, in my opinion, and that would translate to a bust situation for Anderson because of where he's drafted. Do you guys agree with that, or do you think that is outside the realm of possibility?
I think it's absolutely a possibility. And what I think we should strongly reiterate right here, we are not saying these guys are going to bust. We're just saying that we know historically every year that somebody will bust, and so we're throwing out guys that we think have that little tag of potential that they could bust.
When players at the starting running back position have some talent behind them, they need to be paid attention to. I mean, even Alfred Morris, I don't think he's a top 12 drafted back right now. But if Morris goes down with an injury and Matt Jones comes in and has an effective workload, there are certain players that I'm not so worried about who's behind them. Arian Foster, for one. Like Arian, somebody did send in a message about Arian, by the way, because he was my guy yesterday, and he's like, "Are you forgetting what the week-to-week risk of Arian?" Like everybody's just talking about, "Ooh, maybe he's back soon," but all the kind of tumult that an owner of Arian Foster deals with, probably a little bit. Yeah, we should have been talking about that a little bit, but he was my guy, so I'm just gonna pretend that he will be okay. But yeah, when there's talent behind you, that needs to be paid attention to a little bit. We were talking before the show about draft trading and these things, the same quick question, and the idea that sometimes you just like the sure thing. And so if you have the opportunity to trade a guy with a question mark, like let's say somebody in your league loves C.J. Anderson and they have Adrian Peterson or they have Eddie Lacy, and you can throw something in with C.J. to get that guy. I mean, that's the kind of trade I do to give myself the best odds at a top running back for the entire season, because that's what you need. That's why we say draft a running back. You want that solid guy.
And a guy, he's not top 12, but he's top 15 right now. A running back that is, I'm sticking with it because I still have concerns about him, and that is Latavius Murray in Oakland. He fits in perfectly what Jason was talking about, where He's now he's showed a little bit last year, and we just expect a giant leap to happen. So now he's going in the third round.
I don't think we expect a giant leap.
Well,
you better expect a giant leap for taking a guy in the third round.
Yeah, I agree with that, but you can't just say nothing's happened because the situation changed. Because I mean,
No Trent Richardson, no Darren McFadden.
Yeah, no Darren McFadden, no MJD.
Okay, that's fair. But Roy Halou is there, and that's my point. Is I think Roy Halou is a talented back. I
don't think Roy Halou should ever be your point.
Hello.
Yeah, I know you don't agree with that, but watch him on film. He is a very solid runner. They gave him a solid contract to have a role in this offense, and if Latavius Murray struggles out the gate, it would not surprise me at all to see Halou get some early down work.
So what is the second big question we're going to talk about?
The second big question is this the year? Is this finally the year where there is a changing of the guard at quarterback? Because we've got some of the best quarterbacks in the history of the NFL playing right now, but several of them are nearing the end of their career. You've got Drew Brees, who, some, myself included, have kind of
so you refer to yourself.
Well,
my
I mean,
friend.
some outside of here and myself have kind of predicted a little bit of a fall off and the beginning of the end for him. You got Peyton Manning, who some people think that started last year. You've got Tom Brady at the end, and now you've got the new risers, a lot of newer talent. Obviously Andrew Luck. So is this going to be the year where it changes from the old faithful to the new hotness?
Do you want to? Oh, I guess you.
That's
you
just
already
a question
said,
we're
yeah.
looking for as we go to this year. So what do you guys think? The old guys, are they reliable? Are they going to go 16 games, put up solid production this year?
I'm still buying into Peyton Manning. I'm still buying into Drew Brees. I still like these guys. I know that Jason has valid points. They're older and getting towards the end. I guess not Drew Brees, but Manning. I think this could be Peyton Manning's last year, but I believe he has enough left to have one good year. His game is so mentally based, and that we know that his physical skills have eroded in front of us. He looks often like he's playing duck hunt when he just lobs it up. But Demaryius Thomas doesn't care.
No.
Demaryius Thomas will catch that duck every day of the week, and because he's still mentally sharp, he can get it done.
One of the things that is difficult when you see a transition like this is trusting the younger guys to be consistent. One of the things you get more so with the older guys is the week-to-week consistency. One of the things that's been hard about Matt Ryan for years has been big game, small game, big game, small game. One of the things I fear out of Ryan Tannehill is a lack of consistency. I want to see it. I think he's capable of it. But with the younger guys, it's hard to kind of rely on those type of things. And so I think people like Phillip Rivers on a roster will help more fantasy teams than some of these upside plays that people might have more excitement putting him on their team. But I have a hard time believing that starting Phillip Rivers is going to hurt you as much as starting one of those guys.
Phillip Rivers is a very interesting guy because he is inconsistent to me, where last year he came out just the barrels of the gun were steaming hot, just glowing red, and then he completely cooled off towards the end of the year. I think what an interesting thing of this question is there a quarterback that we are projecting this year can take the leap that he will be considered a top 5, a kind of elite status quarterback next year?
So last year, Andrew Luck was outside of that category and then obviously he quickly became that guy. So are those the names you're looking for? Somebody who could be in the discussion as the upper tier?
Robert Griffin.
Ooh,
yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, you got Teddy Bridgewater. If he were to come on gangbusters this year, and I don't expect it because of scheme, but he was drafted for it. He's looked good. He could take that leap. The only other guy that comes to mind is maybe Sam Bradford, because if he just comes out and looks like the guy who was drafted number 1
That's
overall,
the thing to remember. Yeah,
I mean, he came out to be an Andrew Luck, to be one of these guys. An injury and no talent around him has never let that happen. But could that happen this year at the same time that some of these bigger names drop down? So I think this year, and probably even more so next year, we talk about streaming, and really that's just a matter of getting more value late in the draft. The big-name quarterbacks are starting to come towards the end of their value where they're worth that name.
Yeah, and then they're just a name.
And see, I love that name, Sam Bradford, of a guy who next year I bet is being drafted as a top 5 quarterback.
Yeah, that could be the case as long as he's healthy. All right, here's the next question for you guys to talk about here. Which players drafted after the 5th round can break into the top 15? And Mike, you have some data as far as historically how many guys drafted after the 5th. So we're talking 6th and later. How many of those guys have broken into the top 15 at the running back or the wide receiver position? This is a really interesting.
Yeah, last year in 2014, there were 5 running backs drafted after the 6th round or not drafted at all because you had Justin Forsett and C.J. Anderson. So 5 guys drafted 6th or later who finished as top 15 running backs. There were 5 wide receivers drafted after the 5th round who finished in the top 15.
That is interesting because a lot of those guys that happened to last year, the result was, or the reason it happened was a lot of the times opportunity created by injury, for one. And it's not necessarily things that are foreseeable, not something that we can hold on to now. So a guy that jumps out is like Ryan Matthews this season. If DeMarco Murray's gone, how is he not a top 15 running back?
He completely is instantly. And I imagine he's drafted almost everywhere. But if there's ever a league where he's on the waiver wire and Murray goes down, that's like, wow, that's a full fab wallet that's going to get thrown at Ryan Matthews.
Yeah, without question. Allen Robinson's another guy that right now is being drafted outside of the 5th round that we talked about yesterday, or we've talked about a lot, and we'll talk about today with Matt Harmon. But what are your thoughts on him?
On Allen Robinson? Well, we know he's a fan of the footballers, or the footballers are a fan of him.
I think you had it right. He loves the show. That's what I hear.
Mutual love for
Mutual admiration.
the target monster. But he definitely has the ability to grow. However, there is the same exact situation I see with Allen Robinson that I was saying with Mike Evans. There's not much change there. Now the big change that does kind of improve is Cecil Short's leaving. So there's a lot of extra targets. So hopefully that is the reason why he takes a step forward. But I'll throw another name out there because I know at least two of the top 15 that did it last year who were drafted out were rookie wide receivers. I don't expect that to happen all the time. But a guy that's going really, really late who, most of the rookie wide receivers, I just don't see them being able to surprise me with a top 15 year. But Devontae Parker is really sneaky because that's going to be a good offense.
Well, he's a top 15 pick in the NFL.
He could be the number 1 wide receiver on that team. I know, Andy, you said he was going to. We have a water bet, you and I.
That's right.
I still think it's going to be Jarvis Landry, but that's a chip. You talk about who you're going to take with the last pick in your draft. I'll take Devontae Parker in the last pick of my draft and maybe have a top 15 wide receiver upside who
he played yesterday. He played 8 snaps, I believe, in yesterday's game, caught a pass. Very good name to bring up.
Yeah, so they're easing him in, and his value represents so much upside right now. That the offense is great in Miami. We talk that up constantly. So another rookie is that Brashad Perriman. And so you got Devontae Parker, Brashad Perriman. You got to go with Parker because Perriman's situation will be much better when he gets back. But when
we
is
have
he going to
no
be back?
idea.
I mean, he's still not practicing, and so that's going to take some time. Where Devontae Parker could sneak in a couple weeks.
You also look at volume, right? I mean, the guys that did it last year were volume guys. They got a ton of targets. The rookies that got there. So Perriman, I expect could go into that Torrey Smith role and have a bunch of yards. Or maybe those big play touchdowns, but maybe not the same volume that could be there for
Do you think Parker has more volume potential? I mean, with Landry and with Stills and Jennings and Cameron. I mean, I don't see that.
The reason I say that is because we don't know how he's used, but there's more volume in the offensive passing is what I'm saying. Now, maybe Trestman changes that in Baltimore, but Baltimore has been a run-first team, and so we'll see.
So the wide receiver position, perfect transition here. We're going to go ahead and talk to Matt Harmon and discuss kind of what he sees on film from some wide receivers.
You talking to me?
The Fantasy Footballers are now joined by Matt Harmon, fantasy writer for NFL.com and creator of Reception Perception. Why don't you say hello to the people, Matt?
Hey guys, how's it going? Excited to talk to you today. This is, we're right in the thick of things. Everything's kind of kicking off. The first game of the season, 7 days away. So ready to talk to you guys. Yeah,
that is music to our ears. So we want to introduce the listeners to kind of the Reception Perception idea, and we're gonna talk about some sophomore wide receivers and what Matt thinks of them, how from what he's studied on film, and they're kind of how he projects them for this year. So we're going to start it off with a guy who's kind of a forgotten man, and that's Sammy Watkins up in Buffalo, who was a top draft pick, was hot on fantasy rosters last year, but because of the quarterback position, people are, I think, scared off of him a little bit. So what did you see on tape for Sammy Watkins? And before you get into that, actually, just explain what the Reception Perception is.
Yeah, Reception Perception is basically just an in-depth methodology for evaluating wide receivers. I track basically how often they run each route on the route tree, how often they get open on those routes, and then how often they beat both press, man, zone, and double coverage. And there's also other, ancillary measurements like how often they make contested catches, how often they break tackles. So it's basically just, if you want to know about a wide receiver, you check out his Reception Perception and see like how he basically does everything on the field, and there's a lot of good wide receiver metrics out there. I do think mine's a rather in-depth one. So it's basically just what I see on the film and then putting it into a hard data percentage point, and it kind of lets you know how they're used by their team and what they do well.
Great, good stuff.
Yes, and so as far as Sammy Watkins goes, he actually did not come out well in Reception Perception, and I think that kind of surprises people because he definitely had some big statistical games. A lot of his production came in 4 contests where he really went crazy against the Jets and some other teams, and I think that kind of misleads people to what his season-long outlook was. However, I'm open to that being kind of a misnomer for his career because he was obviously injured last season. He was dealing with, I think, a hip flexor or hip pointer or something towards the end of the season. And the hip is really important for a wide receiver because it's where you can generate a lot of your power when you're running routes. You think of just guys that running the post or a slant, how often they have to sink their hips and how often that needs to be a fluid, flexible part of the body. So I'm open to that being kind of, an outlier in terms of his career, how he looked as a route runner last year and getting open and everything like that. So, but the trouble, of course, with Watkins is that he's tied to really kind of a dreadful offense. Rex Ryan's the head coach there. Only one wide receiver ever went over 110 targets with the Jets when he was a head coach, and that was Eric Decker last year. So it's kind of I don't really know what his opportunity is going to look like. He had 128 targets last year. I think he kind of struggles to see that many again. And obviously, I'm a big Tyrod Taylor fan. If you follow me on Twitter or read my work, you know that I'm really liking his early season outlook as a fantasy streamer or a DFS play because he can run. But while he looked good as a passer in the preseason, that's still kind of a question that we need to see answered. So there's a lot of risk with Watkins right now, and I'm usually finding myself shying away from him.
So you're not targeting him. Where about in a draft would you be okay taking him?
I consider him more of like a 7th or 8th round pick, but usually at the height of his stock, he was going in the 4th round. Now you can kind of see him fall to the 6th round in some places, but I just think that's a little too early, and I think there are safer wide receiver targets in that range.
So moving to a guy who had huge success last year was Mike Evans. His situation is very different now, but he's being drafted extremely high. He's being taken as a wide receiver 1. Are you buying into that at all, or are you passing him for that value?
I am buying into that. While I think that Jameis might see his rookie year struggles, I'm sure he's going to throw a lot of interceptions. If you watch him at Florida State, he was a guy who loved to throw targets up to big players. He and Kelvin Benjamin were very productive in Benjamin's final season at Florida State, and I really see Evans as kind of the bigger, more improved version. Well, maybe not bigger, but more improved version of Kelvin Benjamin. So he's a guy that I definitely think Evans is going to take that wide receiver 1 leap this year, especially on a per-game basis. It might be a little bit, there might be a little bit of fluctuation there because of the rookie quarterback struggles and everything, but I think his ceiling is just so tremendous. And he can definitely win you weeks in games where Tampa Bay is going to be throwing to catch up. He has a very favorable quarterback schedule because he plays in the NFC South. So I like Mike Evans kind of to make that leap into wide receiver one status. There's a little bit of risk there, but you can often get him in the third round, and I really like that price.
I'm buying into Mike Evans as well. I think he can have a successful year with Jameis Winston throwing in the ball. He had success with just garbage last year.
Yeah.
So a guy who graded out kind of low on your reception perception, who has a huge opportunity now that Jordy Nelson went down, is Davante Adams in Green Bay. What do you have to say about Davante?
Yeah, Davante Adams has been a tough one for me all year, all off season, I should say. Back in the beginning, he was kind of going in that 8th round range. Sometimes people would even push him in the 7th round, and I thought that was crazy because there just were no targets available for him to take. But of course, now that's changed with the Jordy Nelson injury, so you kind of have to reevaluate. I would feel fine with him in like the 5th or 6th round range, but now people are pushing him up to the 3rd or 4th round. And again, I just can't pay that price given what we know about him from his rookie year. I think that the last thing that we remember about him is that him tearing up the Cowboys in the playoffs. But if you really look at the whole sample of his rookie year, there was a lot of inefficiency. There was a lot of poor route running and ability and he was struggling to beat number 3 corners last year. So I don't see how it's going to get that much better from year 1 to year 2. I think often just projecting players to get better without any real evidence that they will is a dangerous proposition. So with the inflated price of Adams, I'm still kind of backing away because I just think in the 3rd round and the 4th round, you can get much safer guys that are going to get a lot of targets too. I look at Amari Cooper in Oakland as a guy, like he's going to be their number 1. He's going to get a lot of targets. He's kind of going in that same range or a little later. I would much prefer to have him over Adams. And there are many situations I find myself just not being able to take him at his asking price. I'm excited to see him with a more expanded opportunity and see if he has grown. But until I see it, I'm not interested in paying his redraft price. I will say he's very cheap on daily fantasy sites in week 1. He's going to be in a lot of my DFS week 1 lineups because of the opportunity in line. But on a season-long basis, I think he's still going to be a volatile asset.
So we can't let you off the phone. We're going to talk 2 more guys, and one of them has to be my man, Allen Robinson, in Jacksonville. I've been talking him up all off season, how I think he's just going to be just showered in targets. He's going to literally bathe in footballs from Blake Bortles. Talk a little bit about his outlook and how you're viewing him in drafts.
Yeah, I love Allen Robinson, and I think anybody that's followed my work for a long period of time knows that he was the guy I pegged back in April before mini camps and everything as somebody that was going to really break out this season. If you just look at the stats, Bortles and Robinson played together from weeks 3 to week 10, and Bortles threw to Robinson 24 times on 3rd down, which was 13 more than the next highest player. So when Bortles is in trouble, when he needs a completion, he's looking for Robinson. So you're right, he's going to get a ton of targets, especially now that Julius Thomas is out early in the season. That just leads to more looks for Robinson. There's really no competition there. Marquise Lee's not a guy that I'm a fan of, and Allen Hurns is a guy who can make some splash plays, but Robinson's clearly the best route runner, the number 1 guy there. So targets are definitely not going to be an issue. And when I looked at Robinson's reception perception, I saw a guy getting a lot of separation underneath, running really good slant and curl routes and things like that. So he's going to present an easy short target for Bortles in the intermediate range of the field. I love Robinson this year. I agree. He could push for 150 targets in an offense where they're probably going to have to be playing a lot of catch up. And look, I don't want to fall for Bortles for two preseasons in a row, but the guy does look good. I'm a little confident that he can make a slight step up from his rookie year and not be a total disaster, and that's just more benefits for Robinson. So everything about him is a green light for me, and I like the price in the 6th round. If my league, and everybody knows I love Robinson, so my league mates often make me pay up for him. If I have to pull the trigger in the mid-5th round, I'll totally do that. I feel comfortable with everything about his outlook.
Yeah, he's kind of a forgotten guy from that draft class of where it seemed like just 500 wide receivers were widely touted and excellent prospects. And so I think people are not remembering how well Allen Robinson was in college or how well he played in college. I want to move to a guy in Kansas City. Andy, our co-host here, is huge.
He's my guy. He's my guy.
Jeremy Maclin this year. We know the talent is there, but will he pay off for his draft price in Kansas City?
Macklin's been an interesting one for me all year, or again, I should say all offseason, because I think for a lot of these free agents, we oftentimes write the narrative for them before we end up seeing what happens. So I think that obviously Maclin is not going to produce what he did last year in Philadelphia. The opportunity is going to be a little bit less, and we're also going to see a downgrade in just general offensive efficiency and how many plays they're going to run. So I don't think we're going to see numbers that we saw from Maclin last year. But I think that's already priced into his ADP in the sort of 5th or 6th round range of fantasy drafts. So I like targeting Jeremy Maclin there because I think he's going to give you wide receiver 2 numbers. I think he's going to contend with Travis Kelce to lead the team in targets. I think he's going to get open fairly easily for Alex Smith. And while there is some kind of a chicken egg argument to why none of the wide receivers scored any touchdowns, was it Dwayne Bowe's fault? Was it Alex Smith's fault? I think Bowe is not like a terrible NFL receiver, nor do I think Smith is a terrible NFL quarterback, but I just think that they just didn't fit together. The way they play the game just didn't really add up with each other. I think Maclin fits Smith a little bit more. So, like I said, some of the regression in his stats is already priced into where you can take him in fantasy drafts. So I like Maclin as a target. I don't think he's going to fall off the cliff or anything, but I can see 80 catches, 900 to 1,000 yards, and maybe 6 or 7 touchdowns. So I like Maclin as a wide receiver 2 candidate. I'm not totally scared off by him.
We have several bets of the outlook for Maclin, so he's also a very interesting guy for us to watch this year. And so this one really quick, because we're huge Arizona Cardinal fans. John Brown is the next Antonio Brown. True or false?
I totally can see it.
Yeah. That sounds pretty good.
Look, I tweeted this on Sunday. I said that worst case scenario, this guy's T.Y. Hilton. Best case scenario, I can totally see him being Antonio Brown. And of course, I got a lot of pushback from the conservative people on Twitter who don't want you to say anything interesting. But look, if you look at his numbers from a per game basis when he was playing with Carson Palmer and extrapolate them for a 16-game season, he would have had an identical rookie year to T.Y. Hilton. So I don't see how that's even an outlandish comparison. We weren't expecting T.Y. Hilton to be T.Y. Hilton when he was a rookie, nor were we expecting Antonio Brown to be Antonio Brown when he was a first or second year player. But I can totally see him making that same leap. He can obviously go up and get the football in the deep portion of the game. He was the best deep threat charted by reception perception last year. And I also see him having plenty of potential to run routes in the short to intermediate section of the field and get open and make plays with the ball in his hands. And everybody in Arizona loves him. I mean, you guys know that. Carson Palmer and he have been tight all summer. Bruce Arians loves those small wide receivers. And Larry Fitzgerald recently said that this guy is the future of their wide receiving corps. So I'm all in on John Brown. I pretty much staked the flag to him. I love taking him in fantasy drafts. I'm going to really enjoy watching him when the NFL season gets kicked off. Yeah,
we completely agree. We think that Bruce Arians is kind of the master of the small receiver, and John Brown has the potential to be the next one. So we really, really want to thank Matt Harmon for joining us, fantasy writer for NFL.com, creator of Reception Perception. Where can people follow your work besides NFL.com, obviously?
You can follow me on Twitter at MattHarmon_BYB, and you can also find my work on TheBackyardBanter.com and FootballGuys.com, where I'm still contributing a little bit when I'm not slaving away here for the big three-letter league here.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much, Matt.
All right. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks to Matt Harmon for joining us on the show. That's good stuff.
Matt Harmon, sharp-dressed man.
Sharp-dressed man, sharp mind. All right. We're going to go a little long today. I don't want to avoid the mailbag. We're kind of out of time, but let's answer some quick questions on the mailbag.
Mailbag.
All right, let's go ahead and hit the voicemail. If you have a question, you can go to the website and ask it easily on the website. Go to the upper right-hand corner, click the Submit a Question button. You can also send us a voicemail, 302-464-TFFB. Let me ask you this one first, and then we'll get to some voicemails. Jason in San Diego said, who should I start in my flex position week 1? Mike Wallace at San Francisco, Marcus Colston at Arizona, or Kendall Wright at Tampa Bay? What do you guys think?
I think I would go, personally, with Kendall Wright at Tampa Bay.
Yeah,
I mean it's surprising, right? Because you don't see him late, but
yeah, that was if it's a PPR, I'm going Kendall Wright. If it's standard, I'm going to go Mike Wallace.
Yeah, because Mike Wallace obviously could get that big long touchdown, but Kendall Wright's going to have the volume there, and it depends right on your roster too. Because if your roster needs a big play, if you need a boom, then that's going to be Mike Wallace. But if you're just like, look, I think I got this matchup, I can't get nothing out of my flex. You're not going to get nothing out of Kendall Wright. He's going to get targets there, and obviously Tampa Bay's defense, not the best.
All right, Ernest in New Mexico says, hey, guys, big fan of the podcast. I was wondering what you guys thought. Who should I play at my flex? So another flex question. Brandon Marshall or Jarvis Landry in a PPR league?
That's a good question.
That is a really good question.
I'm going to start the year with Jarvis. I love Marshall. These guys are actually very close for me, but in a PPR, I want the surefire targets, and that's got to be Jarvis Landry.
Do you agree
Unless
with
it's
that?
Devontae Parker. I do agree with that. I think the Redskins are who they're playing week 1, and that's just a great matchup. So the Jets have the Browns, I believe, or
Let's look it up.
You sound very confident in that assertion.
I'm Ron Burgundy. Yes, the Jets are playing the Browns.
You are correct, sir.
I am very high on Brandon Marshall this year. I just think because the team will be better, and I really believe the team will be better, I think he is just a guy who's always been open. When he's on the field, he's just always open. He makes difficult catches. He has red zone presence. I just really like Brandon Marshall. So one more quick question here. If you're starting week 1, which matchup do you like more, Cam Newton or Teddy Bridgewater week 1?
Ooh. Cam Newton or Teddy Bridgewater. So Cam Newton, the Panthers. Ooh, I love that matchup against the Jaguars. I don't think there's any matchup that I'm going to take Teddy over that. So I'm gonna
Teddy's
go
playing San Francisco.
Yeah, I'm gonna go Cam.
Yeah, San Francisco's defense has actually looked pretty good, but can they hold up an entire game with that depleted roster, and especially in their middle linebacker situation with Adrian Peterson just crushing the ball, and then you got to stack the box against Teddy Bridgewater, and Charles Johnson or Mike Wallace are going deep. So I'm going to go with Teddy Bridgewater.
Minnesota's looked so incredibly good.
Break the tie, Cam or Teddy?
I'm going to go with Teddy.
Hey.
Completely based on preseason what's happened so far.
We want a week 1? We want a week 1
Yeah,
water bet?
do it.
Just so someone
I'm
gets
not that confident.
I am.
All
All
right.
right, you guys go.
Teddy versus Cam water bet week 1.
Put it on the board.
Water bet.
Instant payout.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. So we'll remember to put that on the site. You can check out the other water bets we've made, the ones I'm going to win, and then the ones the ones that these guys made with each other. So that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening. We're super excited about next week. We're going to talk week 1. Get you all ready. Send in your start-sit questions. Send in your trade questions. We're going to talk trades next week. Thanks for listening to the show, and visit us on Twitter at the FF Ballers.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at www.thefantasyfootballers.com and follow us on Twitter at the FF Ballers.